but I just, right, how are you?
Hello, I'm Dr. Murray Fassett, Director of Academic Programs with the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Welcome to China Forum for 2019. I'd like to get the speakers to come to the panel. And if everyone could find seats. Thank you. I'm going to welcome to the podium our Executive Director, Mr. Marion Smith, who will be moderating the conversation for the first panel.
Again, we have Bill Browder, no stranger to many of you in this room. He is the founder and CEO of Verge Capital Management. He's famous for at least two reasons. One, he became one of the largest investors in the Russian Federation following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And he was then targeted or ran afoul of Mr. Putin and was kicked out. And I believe you have a pending prison sentence if you were to return to Russia today. Two prison sentences. Yeah. The second reason you're famous, is one of the other two reasons you're famous, is that you led, as a result of the killing of your attorney, Legg Magnitsky, as part of your troubles in Russia. You led an international campaign to bring justice to his name. And it was an extraordinary effort that first saw success 7 years ago with the Magnitsky Act, an effort to target and punish individuals involved in gross and systematic human rights abuses, and giving the United States another tool short of threatening military conflict to punish those who are doing very bad things. So those are two reasons you're famous. Your grandfather was famous for a very different reason. Would you just quickly tell us why he was famous?
My grandfather was the General Secretary of the American Communist Party, and ran for president of the Communists in 1936 and 1940 against Roosevelt, was imprisoned in 41, pardoned in 42, and then kicked out of the Communist Party in 1945 for being too much of a capitalist, and then persecuted viciously during the 1950s for and then McCarthy for being communist, and I'm here to be as a critic of the last communist regime, or not last, but the biggest communist regime. And so I'll give you also comfort that I'm not a communist. In my rebellion against, my teenage rebellion in my family, I decided the best way of rebelling against a family of communists was to put on a suit and tie and become a capitalist. So, I'm here among friends, I think, I hope. So.
That's great. I'm going to invite you to the podium to offer some more formal remarks, and then we'll hear from Carl last, and then we'll engage in conversation on this topic. Bill, if I could just ask you to begin by reflecting on the last 7 years of several countries, some successes in the use of the Global Magnitsky Act. But what are some of those successes, and what are some underutilized opportunities that is available through that bill? It's up to you.
Let me just say a few introductory words. During my introduction, you heard that I was once the largest foreign investor in Russia, and now I'm a full-time human rights activist. And I always prided myself on being the only hedge fund manager to become a human rights activist. But I actually am here today with the only other hedge fund manager to be a human rights activist. And I really have to say that knowing the industry of hedge fund managers and the agnosticism of finance people, it really is. I'm so happy to be on this side of the barricade with another person with the same skill set, which is different than the skill set of other people who are human rights activists to go after the bad guys, and we bring a certain perspective which I don't think anyone else has brought to the fight against evil. And I'll explain to you a little bit about my story and what I learned and what's happened from that. And so, very in an extremely tight nutshell, I was fell out of the Putin regime, expelled from Russia in 2005 because I was exposing corruption. My offices were raided in 2007. The regime seized all of our corporate documents, and they used those documents to commit a very complex fraud in which they stole $230 million of taxes that they paid to the Russian government. And I hired a young lawyer named Sergei Magnitsky, the Russian lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, to investigate. He discovered the crime, he testified against the officials involved, he exposed them, and in retaliation, they arrested him, they tortured him for 358 days, and they murdered him in Russian police custody on November 16, 2009. Sergei Magnitsky was murdered as my proxy. If he hadn't been my lawyer, he would still be alive today. He was 37 years old when he died. He left a wife and 2 children. And for me, the burden of his murder, of the Russians murdering him, was something that I wore heavily. And I decided, after getting over the heartbreak and hysteria of the immediate moment, that I needed to devote all of my time, all of my resources, and all of my energies going after the people who killed him. And I put aside my life as a financier, as a businessman, and I spent the last 10 years doing that. And at first we tried to get justice inside of Russia, and we had a lot of material in which to get justice. His murder was not, there was nothing unproven about what happened there. We had a mountain of documentary evidence. But in spite of that, the Russian authorities, headed by Vladimir Putin, and personally involved with by Vladimir Putin, circled the wagons and exonerated every single person involved in Sergei Magnitsky's death. They gave some of the people who were most complicit promotions and state honors. And so it became obvious to me that we weren't going to be able to get justice inside of Russia. And then I said to myself, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And I started to research. And as I said, I was a hedge fund manager. I wasn't a human rights activist. I didn't even know what the tools were. And so I applied the same research skills that I had as an investment person to international justice, and went through all the supposed ways in which you're supposed to be able to get justice. And I discovered that the tools don't exist. So if you look at the, for example, there's the International Criminal Court. I went to the head of the International Criminal Court. I told him the story, and he said we need at least 100,000 dead before we have any case to be brought here. I went to the European Court of Human Rights, which doesn't apply to China, but the European Court of Human Rights is supposed to be a place to adjudicate atrocities in places like Russia. And the European Court of Human Rights will hold the country accountable, they won't hold individuals accountable. It usually took us 7 years to get a judgment, and they paid 30,000 euros to the family. That's not justice. I then explored the idea of something called universal jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction is a concept in law which says that some crimes are so horrible that it doesn't matter where they were committed. You can adjudicate them in certain countries. For example, Germany has universal jurisdiction. Spain does. But as I went through each country's statute books, I discovered that you don't hear about these cases for one simple reason, because they don't prosecute them. And so I was left with no justice. And I said to myself, I can't live with no justice in this case. And I said, well, how can I get justice? And I looked at this particular story of Sergei Magnitsky, and I said, the people who killed him didn't do it for anything other than money. They killed him for $230 million. And they don't keep that money in Russia, because as easily as they stole it, it can be stolen from them. They keep it in the West. And we all see Russians and other nationalities spending their money freely, so their ill-gotten gains freely in the West. And so I took this idea to Washington. I came here to Washington, and I met a Democratic senator named Benjamin Cardin, Republican Senator John McCain, another one, Russia Witter, and I explained them the story of what happened in Sergei. And I said, can we ban the visas and freeze the assets of those people who killed Sergei Magnitsky? And they said yes. And that became known as the original Magnitsky Act. And it was interesting because the original Magnitsky Act was just to ban the visas and freeze the assets of the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky. We launched it, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, other victims in Russia came forward and said, you found the Achilles heel of the Putin regime. Can you sanction the people who killed my brother, my father, my aunt, my uncle? And after about a dozen of these calls, these senators realized there was something much bigger than just the Magnitsky case. And they added 65 words to the Magnitsky Act, which sanctioned all Russian human rights abusers. And all of a sudden, all sorts of other victims came forward on Capitol Hill and started meeting with congressmen and senators. And in a highly partisan era that we're living in, when it went for a vote in the Senate in November of 2012, it passed 92-4. It passed 89% of the House of Representatives, and it became a federal law on December 14, 2012. Vladimir Putin went out of his mind when this passed. He banned the adoption of Russian orphans by American families, and he made it his single largest foreign policy priority to stop the Magnitsky Act. He didn't succeed, and moreover, the reason why we're all here today is that these senators said, wait a second, why should a Chinese human rights violator, why should a Venezuelan human rights violator, why should an Angolan human rights violator get a better deal than a Russian human rights violator? If Vladimir Putin hates this so much, then surely all the other dictators will too. And that became the Global Magnitsky Act. It passed the Senate unanimously in 2016, passed the House of Representatives, and on one of the final days of President Obama's tenure, he signed it into law. We now have the Global Magnitsky Act, and I'm proud to say it doesn't just apply in the United States. The Canadians, in October of 2017, the Canadian Parliament passed it unanimously. The British Parliament passed it last summer. The Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians passed. And I'm also happy to say that the European Union is now got a EU Magnitsky Act. We're now in a situation where bad guys everywhere can be sanctioned. And I'm also happy to say that the US has used it extensively outside of Russia. There is now, there's a Chinese person already on the Global Magnitsky list. There are Venezuelans. There are Burmese generals who are targeting the Rohingya. Last week there was a Ugandan general who was put on the Global Magnitsky list. And I just want to, I have a lot more time to talk, but I just want to finish up with one really important point about why it's so terrifying to be on these sanctions lists. The moment that you get added to the US sanctions list, and it doesn't just apply to the US, at that moment, every bank in the world subscribes to a service which tells the bank that a person has been added to that list. And no bank in the world wants to do anything in violation of US sanctions. And why don't they want to do anything in violation of US sanctions? Because they could be fined 3 times the amount of whatever the amount of money is of business they're doing with a sanctioned individual. So if a person has money in, let's say, a Swiss bank, and this is a real example, there's a Russian with money in a Swiss bank, he got put on the sanctions list. And the Swiss bank refused to move his money because they didn't want to be in violation of the US Magnitsky Act. And so the US Magnitsky Act ends up canceling everybody's visas, and also it freezes everyone's money all around the world. You become a financial pariah. It's a terrible, terrible thing for these people, and they really, really hate it. And that's why this tool is so useful for all the terrible things that are going on in China today, and I look forward to discussing it further.
I'll just ask one quick follow-up, Bill. So let's take the individual Chen Guo, who is the party secretary for Xinjiang and responsible for at least 1 million to 3 million Uyghurs and others in concentration camps there. He was previously administration head in Tibet and carried on many of the cultural genocide policies against Tibetans. Is he a good candidate, someone at his level in the hierarchy, a good candidate? Or what's your advice on the prudential application of Magnitsky sanctioning? And should it go all the way to the top? Or how close to the top should we get?
I've been following the whole story of the persecution, worse than persecution of the Uyghur minority in China, and that story deserves a response. And in a world where there's such intertwined relationship, economic relationship between U.S. and China, you can't impose, or it's going to be politically impossible to impose trade sanctions, but the Magnitsky sanctions are very targeted, so you pick out a few villains, ones that would really hurt, and you target them individually and specifically. It's kind of like, and that way you can carry on having diplomatic and trade relations with the country, but at the same time express your displeasure and cause real harm to people who are doing bad stuff. The way in which you need to go about it, and the way in which it sounds like you have, is to find individuals who are deeply involved in this, where there's evidence of involvement, and where their involvement, where sanctioning them would send a message. And I haven't looked specifically at this individual, but I think the Uyghur story deserves Magnitsky sanctions, and if this was the guy, maybe this is the guy, and I guess it's behooves the experts who know where the evidence is to figure out the right characters to sanction.
Thank you. And next, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Kyle Bass. He's the founder and chief investment officer of Hayman Capital Management, an investment manager of private funds focused on global event-driven opportunities. He's also the former chair of the risk committee of the board of directors of the University of Texas Investment Management Company, which manages approximately $45 billion in the University of Texas endowment, which I believe is the third largest university endowment in the country, or only the largest public university.
Yeah, largest public, second largest.
Before I invite you to the podium, I just want to read a portion of text from the 2016 National People's Congress when they passed their 13th five-year plan for economic and social development of the People's Republic of China, which essentially set forward a strategy to mix up state-owned enterprises with non-state-owned enterprises, and to obtain foreign financing to support their projects. And to make use or require foreign money, the CCP, and I quote, encourages Chinese financial institutions and enterprises to obtain financing in foreign markets, and will support enterprises in increasing overseas investments and becoming more deeply integrated into global production, value, and logistics chains. Among those companies that are now listed in the United States capital markets are Hikvision, Dawa, BGI Genomics, AVIC, China Shipbuilding Industry Corporation, meaning that like when MSCI inserted some Class A Chinese stock in their expanding or emerging markets index, a lot of Americans' money ended up funding these companies. And among the things that some of these companies have funded, it's been reported recently that a subsidiary of Huawei helped to build the telecommunications infrastructure in North Korea. We have companies that are participating in the biometric and facial recognition technology in Xinjiang. And we have companies that are building and militarizing some of the islands in the South China Sea. I'm pretty sure this is not why we built the American Free Enterprise system. And during your time at the University of Texas, you were one of the very earliest people to identify, flag, and set some sort of model on how to divest and screen and not invest initially in companies like this. So I hope you'll address some lessons learned there, and also what are some of the most basic things that all Americans need to know about China, most especially business people and policymakers. Please.
Well, thanks for having me here, and Bill, thank you for being the crusader you are in developing, I think, the single most important tool for enforcement of human rights violations the world has. So I commend you. I'm a big fan of yours, and happy to be up here next to you. The question that was asked, and actually I go back to Bill's opening remarks, he so eloquently put it that understanding the motivations of even the people that went after Sergei, it all boils down to money. It all boils down to economics. They killed him for $230 million, and the Chinese government operates in very similar ways to the Russian government, and it all boils down to the money. And I'll give 2 anecdotes about Russia that Bill didn't give. One of my friends runs a firm that manages about $100 billion, and he recently found big pools of Putin's money. And if you guys read the National Intelligence Authorization Act the U.S. passed earlier this year for funding our intelligence services, one of the requirements in that act is that every year now, the national intelligence agencies of the U.S. have to publish both the on-book and off-book net worth of Vladimir Putin, which is something no one's ever done before. And our intelligence agencies believe Putin and Xi are the 2 richest people in the world with all of their off-book assets. And so again, what motivates these leaders is also financial gain. My friend who found big pools of Putin's money went to a QC in the UK to bring a whistleblower complaint. And the QC sat down with him and they said, well, we have 8 such complaints on record, and all 8 we're now dealing with the estate of the whistleblower. And my friend said, what do you mean? And they said, well, all 8 whistleblowers have been killed. So if you want to file this, we will move on with your estate if they kill you. But we suggest you don't bring this case. And so Putin is amazing at finding people, and I hope you stay safe, Bill, for the rest of your life. But as we move into China, what I hope you leave here today is understanding how China operates and what motivates their operations, especially in global capital markets, which is where I spend a lot of my time. And so I'm just going to move real quickly. I don't have a quick, so for me, advance to a presentation real quick. I'm going to start, if you go to the next one, please. Next. Sorry. Well, disclaimers. It's important to understand China operates in 2 worlds. One world is their domestic world, where they print their own money. They run their own police force. They control the price level, and they basically control everything. How many times have you heard, when you're talking about China, they go, their institutions are too levered, or they've grown credit too fast, or China is turning too much money, and you say there's going to be a collapse in their system, and they say, yeah, but they're China. Right? They can just keep doing what they do domestically, and that's partially true. What's really important to understand China's global motivations is how China interacts with the rest of the world. And the way they interact with the rest of the world is they're very short on many natural resources. Right? They have to buy a lot of crude oil from the rest of the world. They have to buy a lot of basic materials. They have to buy a lot of food. And then now that they're semi-opening, they're letting their birds fly a little, they're letting their population travel that's come out of abject poverty, those people spend dollars. They don't spend RMB because no one takes RMB around the world. So China has this desperate need for dollars. And what I'm showing you here is that all you need to pay attention to is the solid black line. The solid black line is a current account. We don't need to get into economic, the economic weeds too much. The way you think about the current account is a wealth transfer. Does China have more net dollars around the world coming in, or they have more going out? And what I'm showing you here is really for the first time ever, China's moved into a situation where they have more money moving out. They don't have enough coming in versus how much is going out for all of those things I just told you about. And this is a secular problem. This isn't a cyclical issue. They have more people traveling every day to foreign locations and spending dollars, euros, yen, or pounds, mostly dollars. And so they have this insatiable need for dollars. And when you leave here today, it's very important to understand that, because in our conflict, and I'll call it, we have a number of conflicts with China that we're fighting today. There are really four of note. One is clearly an economic conflict. The other is a narrative conflict, i.e. controlling the press, the narrative about what's going on. The third is a data conflict or cyber conflict. We all are very aware of that. The fourth of which hasn't happened yet, hopefully it won't, is a kinetic conflict. So we're already fighting 3 or 4 wars against China today, and if you move to the next one. This is a very in-depth slide, but the point I'm trying to make is we all know when China releases data, they don't tell the truth. But this is the simple identity that we need to pay attention to. The red line is just the simple exports and imports in China. So if you have a closed economy like they do, and a closed capital account, and you have to settle your offshore trade in the dollars you spend overseas, there should be a simple identity, i.e. the amount of offshore currency of trade should equal the sum total of your imports plus your exports. And anything above that is money running from China. So the difference between the yellow line and the red line is money leaving China. And so we all know, if you look at the differentials there was a mini devaluation in June 2015, and then as Trump was getting elected in November 2016, you also had a big spike between those lines. But if you look at where we are now, how many Chinese people do you know that are wealthy that can't wait to invest more money in China, send their kids to school in China, and just do more business in China, right? Every wealthy person you know can't wait, as Bill mentioned, to buy a Western asset, whether it's in Canada, the US, or Europe, anywhere where there's a rule of law. That's where the Chinese want their money. And so it's important to note that there's a desperate need for capital to leave, and the government is really holding on tight to that relationship. Next. This is a point I was trying to make earlier. Does this look cyclical or secular as a problem to you? This is actually China's data. Now, I keep using it, and I used a few other things that they've given us in the past from CPIC. And when I published a few of them, they got published in the Financial Times. China just removed the data set. So I hope they don't remove this one. But this is the travel services deficit, i.e. this is the money leaving China from the people traveling and spending abroad. It's running now about $350 billion a year and growing. Again, that line doesn't look cyclical to me. That looks like a secular problem. Next. This one's fascinating to me. This is crude oil. And so what you see in the solid line that looks like y equals mx plus b there, that is the total dollar amount of crude oil. That's the total sheer volume of crude oil that they import in millions of tons. And just make a point, when crude oil collapsed, the other one's the price. And so crude oil collapsed at the end of 2014. You see China was importing roughly half of what they're importing now, as far as, so they've increased their volume of imports 50% in the last 5 years, and the price of crude, of course, turned around from the low 30s into the 50s and 60s. And now the actual gross dollar amount we're spending on crude is more than it was when crude was at $140 a barrel. And again, this doesn't look to me like a cyclical problem. It looks like a secular issue. Next. So one thing Bill mentioned, one thing Mary mentioned is the CCP's directive to all of their companies to go access global capital markets to borrow as much dollars, euros, yen, or as many dollars, euros, yen, and pounds as they can. This is from the Bank for International Settlements. They've now borrowed a little bit more than $1 trillion in U.S. capital markets. So when you think about what's going on and what's motivating the Chinese and what's motivating everything they do in our trade war and everything they do with their, let's say, their own economic and military ascendancy, is they have a desperate need to grab dollars. Next. One more, please. So these are in depth, and I'm sorry, these are for a presentation for Georgetown a little later. I put it in here. But what I did here, for those of you that can see, I have 1 minute to try to explain to you the rest of this. But basically, the median share price depreciation of all Chinese listings in the US is about down 60%, because we don't require audits of Chinese companies. We have this loophole in the US that says if you're a level 1, level 2, level 3 ADR, you can just send us a glossy 10K. You don't have to file financials, and you don't have to require a covered audit. So I'll stop there and I'll give you one anecdote. I'm on the Hill yesterday trying to strengthen Rubio's Equitable Act, which is going to stop U.S. capital flow going to the MSCI indices and into China. And the seat I was sitting in yesterday, one of the congressmen said, "Hey, you know who was sitting in your seat yesterday?" And I said, "Who?" He said, "This guy Jiang Feng, who is the Chinese equivalent of the head of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission." So the head of the CSRC was sitting in the same seat I was, lobbying a congressman, explaining to him why Chinese companies don't need audits. Because, of course, they don't want the Equitable Act to pass, because they want to keep all the money flowing. The only thing keeping China afloat today are foreign investment flows from the United States and from the West. So I'll stop there. I know we have so much more to cover, but I wanted to at least get there. So I'll stop and go with you.
Thank you. And just to carry on that point, and speaking of SEC, from an American investor perspective, do you think it is a mistake for indices to not be explaining some of the material risks that might be present if they're investing in companies with national security or human rights ramifications for the U.S.?
Yeah, so there are various levels of answering your question. If you want to go to the human rights level of things, you mentioned a real set of companies that should clearly be excluded from these indices, whether you go China Shipbuilding or Hikvision or even PetroChina, who's breaking our sanctions with Russia, with Iran. That's one thing, but it's actually bigger than that. And in the US, our retirement systems are governed by a DOL, Department of Labor law called the ERISA Act of 1974. And basically, it stipulates that if you're going to be a fiduciary of US retirement funds, you have to follow what's deemed to be a higher standard for investment fiduciary. And that higher standard requires extreme prudence on your part. And I asked the crowd, and I'll ask you back, do you guys think it's prudent to invest money in a country that has no rule of law, that won't submit its companies to basic covered audits as per the US PCAOB, and their securities aren't in compliance with US securities laws? How is that even possible, I ask you?
Next week, the People's Republic of China will celebrate 70 years. That officially means they have outlived the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And in assessing the relative health of the PRC, they are certainly militarily closing the gap with the United States. But also in terms of economic power, they seem to have achieved a level of economic health that the Soviet Union didn't, certainly not in the 70s and the 80s. Is that a misperception? This question is to both of you. How do you assess the strength of the PRC today?
I'll start. Clearly, they are a regional power, and we are a global power as it stands today. And their Navy is almost larger than ours, and they're all projecting power in that region where the 9-dotted line is. The inequity of it all goes to how is China building such an enormous military? And again, how is their economic ascendancy coupled with their military assertiveness and military build? And it all comes back to Western capital is actually building these ships. There was a securities offering that Societe Generale, the French bank, did, where they raised $1 billion for China shipbuilding. Like, you read this prospectus. They raised it in the US. They raised $1 billion. US funds were the biggest buyers of this bond issue. And the uses of the funds were to build China's second aircraft carrier. Now, this wouldn't have happened back during the Cold War with Russia. And for some reason right now, I think it's important to talk about the disconnect between the various, let's say, constituencies in the US. You have the executive branch, you have our military, and you have our intelligence services that all count China and Russia as 2 of 4 hard targets in everything they rank. And yet our Wall Street can't wait to invest another shekel in China with the hopes of making another dollar chasing El Dorado. And That's got to stop, right? We have to start thinking about national security and stop. China's using our greed against us, and we really got to somehow stop that. And that will stop their military building.
I just want to take that point and expand on it a little bit, coming back to my own sanctions agenda. As I was finishing up my speech, I told the story of the Russian oligarch who had $1 billion at the Swiss bank. And the head of the Swiss bank had a problem, which is that if the oligarch sends him a message, say, transfer my $1 billion to Russia, to Gazprom Bank, then the Swiss bank could potentially have to pay a fine of $3 billion to the US Treasury for violating sanctions. So the head of the Swiss bank has the upside on a wire transfer is $150. So a $1 billion wire transfer, he gets paid $150. And the downside is he may have to pay the US Treasury $3 billion. So $150 upside, $3 billion downside, what's the obvious choice? You don't want to send the money to this oligarch, that's to Russia. But the oligarch's money is not frozen by the Swiss government. And so the oligarch has the opportunity to sue the Swiss bank to say, I was going to invest that $1 billion in a new tech startup that's going to go up 30 times. And so he potentially has a downside of $30 billion if he doesn't send it, or something. I'm just making that number up. So the head of the Swiss bank is in a terrible, terrible position. Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. And so what is his natural reaction going to be in that situation? His natural reaction was to gather up all the account officers inside his bank and say to them, let's fire everybody who could ever be sanctioned in Russia, any oligarch, anybody else. And so as a result, even though one guy was sanctioned, the entire community of Russian oligarchs were fired as customers of the bank. And I tell the story in relation to what he was just saying, which is that in order to cut the flow of bad guys, one just needs to start to implement these sanctions programs because they inconvenience the private sector in a very profound way. And you're never going to be able to convince a bank or a mutual fund to not invest on moral terms. But everybody will not invest if they think there's a downside to investing. And that's what has to be done with China, it has to be done with Russia, it has to be done with other regimes.
This year, the last 110 days or so, we have seen unprecedented protest in Hong Kong, a global financial center. What do you think about those protests, and what do you think about the United States reassessing its treatment of Hong Kong, which of course enjoys special financial and immigration advantages over mainland China?
How long do we have? It's important to note that the good people of Hong Kong are deciding to fight the fight that they would have been fighting in 2047. I'm just bringing it forward to today because they realize today is the fight for their liberty, their rights, and democracy that they have enjoyed ever since really the handover and free handover to the Chinese in 1997. And unfortunately, for Xi and his regime, it's his worst nightmare because it brings to the world stage the manner in which the CCP operates. The problem that Hong Kong's posing for him is there are a lot of cameras there, and there's free internet at the moment, and it's difficult for even their propaganda outlets like the Global Times and China Daily and the others to even spin what's happening there with the police going and just brutally beat citizens on trains. And now, I'm sure you saw, unfortunately, yesterday that the Hong Kong police said they're going to have to shoot someone. And I think that was a warning for this weekend. So sometime between now and October 1st, I think things are going to take a market turn to the worse. And the problem is there's really nowhere to go for either side. And so I think it's just going to worsen. But the people of Hong Kong are fighting this clash of civilizations between, I think, democracy and communism.
In my opinion, the Chinese are boxed in much more than they were 30 years ago because all those charts we just showed, which is that for them to do a Tiananmen Square type of massacre in Hong Kong in a world where they're trading so dramatically greater, with so much more, they have so much more trade, so much more investment, they got so much more to lose. And I don't know, I can't predict what's going to happen, but what I can say is the reason it hasn't happened, the reason it hasn't been Tiananmen Square so far, is that they got a lot to lose financially. And I was saying before that fund managers won't act morally, but the public opinion will create laws or implementation of laws which will force them into an uneconomic situation if they do that. And they've got to think very carefully about how they want to play this thing out, because there's a lot of money for them at stake.
Well, that's perfect, Bill. I think one more thing I'll add is Hong Kong is the conduit. It is the conduit for China's ability to raise dollars. That's where the majority of foreign currency that flows into China flows through Hong Kong. And so you're having, really China's having a problem with this golden goose at the moment. And so to further add to your point, it's the reason that we haven't seen this Tiananmen-style massacre yet is they're not quite sure how to handle this situation. I just know that as we get closer to the 70th anniversary of the Communist Party on October 1st, I'm pretty sure the regime is not going to allow these protests to continue. So I think we're in the fourth quarter of a horrible game.
There seems to be some parallels between the uncertain status of West Berlin in the 50s, early 60s, and as one of the beginning episodes of the Cold War in the United States and the USSR. Parallels with what's happening in Hong Kong, and a major showdown over the fate of 7 million people in an international city that has never before been ruled by a Communist Party. And so for the free world to lose Hong Kong and be absorbed into the PRC system would seem to be a defeat. But would you say that we're in a Cold War with China? Yes. Or what would be some of the markers that we could look at and say that yes, we have entered a Cold War footing?
Look, we've been in a Cold War with China for the last 20 or so years, and we just realized it a couple of years ago. And so they've been fighting a war, as I mentioned, 3 or 4 fronts for the last 2 decades. And our country has just woken up to the various, ways in which China's been fighting and using our own tools against us as far as being an open society and free democracy.
The Chinese are I'm not a China expert, but I'm a Russia expert. But I'm actually, when I compare China to Russia, I think the Chinese are far more long-term, far cleverer in their insidious strategy, and far more effective. Because Russia just puts it in everyone's face right then, there, and now. In every different situation, it's all one big zero-sum, 1-0 winner-loser conflict. Whereas the Chinese are much more subtle about the whole thing. And for me, what I found interesting is the way in which Chinese have gone about effectively taking over Africa with no guns and troops, just money and corruption. And they've done it well, and nobody has said a word because everyone's been focused on other places. And so the Chinese, in my opinion, are sort of playing a 50-year game, whereas some countries like Russia are playing this month, this year, next year game. And because of that, it's a much more dangerous global situation to have China doing it smart and doing it subtly. And situations like Hong Kong are probably their worst nightmare because they like to do this stuff really behind the curtain where nobody can see it on CNN and nobody can comment. And no people here in Washington are talking about it. And so it's kind of just coming out in the open right now. And this is not how they want to play.
One point I'll add to that is when you look at China and Russia, I agree with Bill that they are trying to play a much longer game. Unfortunately, the economics of the situation are going to catch them. And what I mean by that is Russia is extremely resource rich. They grow their own food. They have enough energy. and they have their own basic needs covered domestically, and they free float their currency. So when Russia gets into trouble, when oil drops 50–60%, they let the currency take the hit as the, call it, self-countercyclical measure that helps bring their economy back into some sense of stasis. China has a rigid system where they're desperately short natural resources and foreign currency, and they want to play a long game, but the economic reality of China is actually going to catch them. And so I think they've been playing a long game, hoping to play a long game, developing a narrative that they're a long game player, and we actually hold all of the cards. If we start imposing Magnitsky sanctions on those in Xinjiang and other places around China for human rights violations, and we start using the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and excising the corrupt companies that are doing business here in the US, particularly in the telco sector, China's flow of capital is going to have a stick thrown at these folks, and all we have to do is follow our own laws to get there.
Kyle, for just a moment, would you outline briefly your experience at the UT endowment, and what was a red flag for you, and how did you go about identifying and delisting or divesting from these companies?
So Bill mentioned earlier, when you get put on a sanctions list, a primary sanctions list, there are all kinds of services that all the banks subscribe to, all the investment banks subscribe to it, and you get blacklisted that minute. The much larger issue that I wanted to tackle with the UT system is once we sanction, whether it's a Russian entity or a Chinese entity, or an Iranian entity for that matter, once we sanction the primary entities, there are businesses globally that are still chasing profits that decide to continue to do business with them despite the sanctions. So take Iran, for example. When I look through what I deem to be, they call them secondary sanctions enterprises, whether you have Total or Siemens or China Shipbuilding or China Petroleum continues to do business with the primary sanctioned entity, we as an endowment had no policy that says all of our money is externally managed. So we didn't have a policy in place that said, hey, we don't think our capital, our endowment money, should help grow businesses that are openly defying US law. And so I hired some sanctions lawyers here in DC to help basically write a compliance program from scratch, dealing with the sanctions regime and sanctioned entities, and more importantly, what they deem to be scrutinizable entities, which are entities that just continue to do business with the bad guys. And I'll tell you, it was an uphill climb because as Bill and I have spoken here, when you think about the incentives of the players, the staffs of all of these investment firms are paid on their relative returns, on their returns above a benchmark. And if you start carving big names out of their benchmark, that makes their eventual payday have a big question mark. And so the incentives didn't really align with what we were doing there, and it was let's call it an uphill climb. It took about 6 months to get it done.
And of course, we do know that some of the companies we've been talking about, there are state public pensions that are invested in some of those companies, which of course, could be resolved through state legislatures taking it seriously. With that, we have time for 2 questions. If you would, please stand and identify yourself and ask your question. Yes, sir.
Microphones or just
I think you might just have to speak
no, it's just
loudly.
the sound off, no problem.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Chris Orr. I'm a current DoD contractor, former Air Force officer, former DHS, and proud VOC donor. I guess, I know, Marion, you might be the best position to answer this question. I'll throw out the whole panel. Wei Jianqing, I'm sure you recall back in the mid-1990s when then President Clinton so controversially reneged on his campaign promise to revoke China's most favored nation trade status. Wei was the most prominent human rights dissident activist in China. I'm just wondering, especially with the goings on in Hong Kong, we have heard more about him. What is he up to these days? Is he still active with the human rights situation?
He certainly is, and he's not here, I don't think. Is he? But he was at an event, we were at an event together and spoke at the Hoover Institution here, commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacres. And I know he writes very actively still as well. Is there another question? Yes, ma'am?
Hi, Brendan Fair from the Fund for American Studies. How much of an impact do you think China's demographic problems are going to have in its ability to seize both economic and political power? And I'm referring both to its high elderly population and the disproportion between men and women, which is a result of the one-child policy.
So a great question. For those of you that might not have heard it over there, it's how will China's demographic problems with the one-child policy and the current demography of the elderly population, how will it affect their economy? Clearly, if you look at countries like Japan and Italy, the most heavily indebted nations in the world, they also have commensurate population declines. And so what that brings about is more deflation and inflation. If you deflate when you have a levered economy like China, China has called $55 trillion worth of assets in their banks if you dollarize it, and they only have an economy of $13 trillion. The U.S. has $20 trillion of assets and a $20 trillion economy. They're, call it, 4 times more levered than the U.S., and they've got this real problem with population and demographics, right? At best, they have a 20-year duration mismatch in their population. If they went to a 5-child policy today, you'd still have a 20-year problem. And so I think it's just going to make it a little bit worse. But I actually think what's going on with Hong Kong and the globe today is going to act on them much faster than call it a long-term population decline.
Okay, we do have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So please raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I'm Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I'm completely puzzled as to why we haven't begun the 40-year-long campaign to depose the Communist Party. We certainly started this in 1950, succeeded 40 or so years later. Where's the current campaign to break the censorship system? We certainly have the technologies to do that, and we have some faith that people with full suites of information will make different choices about their society. But I see nothing, no congressional funding for the secret committee to find out the 20 or 100 different ways to break the suzerainty of the Communist Party. What the heck is going on here?
So I'm not part of the intelligence community, but know a lot of those people. Let's just say our National Security Council is very aware of this situation, and it's taken a few years to get us there, many years, as you mentioned. And you have to think about, again, the incentives of those at play. Back in the Russian days, when we were fighting Russia in the Cold War, we weren't really thinking about 1 billion people and investing around them and having greed drive our decision-making processes. Today, what we've got is Wall Street, and I mean Wall Street in its totality, X, maybe Bill and myself, it is actually very pro-CCP, pro-investment, the biggest fighters of the CFIUS reform they were Wall Street and U.S. corporations that have outsourced a lot of their supply chains. So we're fighting a battle today that has opponents, domestic opponents that are all the billionaires that run these businesses and that have made money with special access in China. And so my view is the opposition is very different today than it was when we were in the Cold War with Russia. And we need the national security apparatus, we need the apparatus of the executive branch and our military to speak up a little more and embarrass those that can't wait to invest another dollar in China. I think that's why you're not hearing more about it, but I can tell you behind the scenes, there's a lot going on today that wasn't going on 2 or 3 years ago.
And of course, not just Wall Street, but tech companies, Silicon Valley, cooperating with the Chinese Communist Party, and I guess most infamously, Project Dragonfly, where you had Google engineers working with Chinese censorship authorities to build systems to help censor the Chinese people. But I think his question probably brings up another question, and that is, before we can get the policy and congressional funding, there has to be political will, public sentiment for it. And Bill, you mentioned a minute ago, if you think compared to Russian behavior, Chinese are much more subtle, much more long-term. And they do seem to have either enjoyed this perception or helped foster it. That after '89, the '90s, they were road reform. American businessmen championed the idea, scholars championed the idea that they were some sort of halfway house between communism and capitalism. And it seems to have been a bipartisan problem that was not formally addressed at the level of national security strategy until very, very recently. So from your own careers and perspective, I mean, why do we find ourselves in a situation where the national security strategy has now listed China as a top threat, the first time in history that the United States and China are on that footing? And there's such a massive gap between the analysts and those who know what's going on, and the public and lawmakers.
But I just see that it was only until very recently that we got to see with our own eyes the stuff that China experts have known for so long, and this the story of the Uyghur concentration camps is something that you can't see without having a very strong emotional reaction. That's no secret. It's now, and we're also in a world now. I mean, evil has been going on sort of consistently for a long time, but our understanding of the evil has now skyrocketed because of satellite imagery, because of YouTube cell phone videos, and so I mean all the stuff that's going on. We don't necessarily witness some of the uprisings inside China because it's all pretty well tamped down, but the stuff going on in Hong Kong and the stuff we've learned about Uyghurs is just absolutely offensive and appalling to any normal human being. And that has elevated the public opinion in the United States. You don't have to be an expert on China to find reaction, and that reaction has fed into lawmaking and policy making and a general reaction, which is now coming into the way in which we act going forward. But I don't think anyone in the world can get away now with the stuff they could get away with before, and all the bad guys are learning it the hard way.
Yeah. I'm going to give you an anecdote to your question, and it talks about Bill's assertion that China's playing the long game. China has played a long game in many different verticals in our economy. One of them is the World Bank, and China enjoys a developing country status in its borrowings to the World Bank and its ascension to the WTO. They're still treated as a developing economy. Right? They have the world's fastest supercomputers. They have the world's best hypersonic testing lab. And they have the world's first fully secure 5G satellite network, and yet we're lending them money to build effing railroads. This is absolutely insane. They borrowed $3 or $4 billion a year from the World Bank. They should have graduated from borrowing from the World Bank when their GNI per cap exceeded $6,200. It's now $10,200. They are 50% above the cap of the World Bank, and they're still borrowing $3 or $4 billion a year. And guess who guarantees the World Bank's money? Everyone in this room. Okay, we're the sole sovereign guarantor of the World Bank. And so how did China do it? Oh, by the way, on the human rights issue, on balance sheet of the World Bank, they lent $100 million to Xinjiang directly to build the concentration camps. It's on balance sheet right now, $100 million from the World Bank. How did they do it? Well, China installed new positions in the World Bank in the last few years. That is, believe it or not, the chief ethics officer for the World Bank is Chinese. The chief financial officer for the World Bank is something new. There used to be 5 different officers of the 5 different constituencies of the World Bank, and now it's just one. So one person oversees $7 trillion worth of flow into Chinese nationals. These are crazy things going on in broad daylight here in the United States that just have to stop. Now, the World Bank's probably going to get a congressional hearing. I'm actually fairly certain they're going to get one. But these kinds of things have to be tackled one by one. And it's amazing when you see how long the game is that they've been playing and how they play it. But we must wake up.
Thank you. And with that, please join me in thanking Bill Browder and Kyle Bass, not only for the remarks today, but for their courage in being champions of freedom and human rights. Thank you.